Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome in. We'll get started in just a moment. Great. Hello to all logging on, and thank you for joining us for today's Missouri Prairie Foundation webinar. We'll go ahead and get started. So good afternoon. This MPF webinar is Bats of the Midwest, Ecology, Conservation, and Prairie Connections with Jeanette Bailey. My name is Lily Germeroff, Conservation Program Associate of the Missouri Prairie Foundation, and thank you all for joining us today. And today's presentation explores the bat species found in the Midwest, their ecological roles, and the habitats that they rely on, including forests, wetlands, and prairies. But before we continue, I'll review a couple of Zoom basics. So when you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom window. They'll be read aloud and answered following the presentation's conclusion. We're joined by Emily Gustafson, MPF's Director of Operations, for the Q&A. So thanks in advance for your thoughtful live submissions. And all who have registered can look forward to receiving a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to this recording and more resources. So to more thoroughly introduce Jeanette Bailey, Jeanette is a wildlife biologist specializing in bat ecology, subterranean environments, and endangered species conservation. She holds a master's in biology from Eastern Michigan University, where she focused on bat ecology and sampling methodologies. With extensive experience in field research and conservation, Jeanette previously served as a bat biologist for the Missouri Department of Conservation, leading bat population monitoring efforts, conducting subterranean surveys, and developing research protocols to assess and protect critical habitats. She has worked closely with state and federal agencies, as well as nonprofit organizations, to implement conservation strategies for threatened and endangered species. Currently, she works in environmental consulting, where she provides expertise on endangered species assessments, habitat conservation, and regulatory compliance. Her work involves conducting field surveys, analyzing ecological data, and helping clients navigate environmental policies to support responsible land management and conservation efforts. So thank you for presenting to us, Jeanette, and I'll turn it over to you.
I should be unmuted now. Can you hear me? Okay, and can you see my little pointer? Okay, great. Hi, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Well, it says welcome to Bat Week, but in my world, every week is Bat Week because I'm a bat taxa specialist, also known as a chiropterologist, but nobody says that. Everyone just says bat biologist, but that's a little bit of trivia for you for your next pub trivia. So yep, there I am. That's a picture of me when I was working for Department of Conservation. I can be reached now by my Gmail address. And this is just a lovely picture of my favorite place in Missouri to sample bats. It's Pilot Knob National Wildlife Refuge. That is in Iron County, Missouri. And it's just one of the best places to be at sunset. All right, so just starting very broadly, bats belong to the second most diverse order of mammals. It's called Chiroptera, and it's second only to rodents. And the current species count worldwide is over 1,400 species. But of course, that is growing all the time and probably out of date at this point. And so bats are also extremely diverse in their appearance and their ecology. So like on the left here is the smallest bat that weighs only 2 grams and is often referred to as the smallest mammal. However, There are some species of shrew that give it a run for its money in terms of the smallest mammal. And then on the other side here is a flying fox, which is the largest species of bats, and they have a wingspan of nearly 6 feet. So quite something to imagine. So like I said, the order of mammals is called Chiroptera, and that comes from the Latin chiro, meaning hand, and pteron for wing. So it's hand wing. And so if you look at the bone structure of a bat wing, it's analogous to your hand. So your thumb and then your fingers elongated out form the bony structure of the wing. And then this skin that is the webbing between the wings is called a patagium, and it's a very elastic, stretchy skin. And that's why they are chiropterans. So obviously they use their wings for flight, and they're the only true flighted mammal. I'm sure you all know that flying squirrels don't actually fly. So this is another thing that makes bats super unique in terms of the animal kingdom. And this is a graph showing a well-documented trend where the larger the body mass, the longer the expected lifespan. So if you see elephants over here, they're on the large end of the spectrum and they have a longer lifespan. And then we see like our other small rodents over here, being just a few grams, having a shorter lifespan. And generally, the smaller mammals have more of a quantity versus quality strategy when it comes to reproduction. And the larger mammals tend to have a quality over quantity. For example, elephants, which are the largest mammals, but they largest land mammals, they didn't include whales. So for elephants, for example, they become reproductive at around 23 years of age and have one calf every 5 years or so. And mice and other small rodents with a small body mass have a short lifespan, maybe a couple years, and they have high reproductive rates. Mice can have up to 10 litters of pups every year. But our outlier here is the bats. They are very small. However, they have what's called a K-selective lifespan. That is what we see in our larger bodied mammals. Seeing that life strategy in a small bodied mammal is quite rare. So the longest lived bat on record, and this is very difficult data to get, but the longest lived bat on record is 42 years old, and it's a Myota species that's found in Europe. There's a lot of speculation on, why this is, but there's nothing definitive that anyone has uncovered that is like, this is how bats do it. It's how they do it. But most of our North American bats also only have 1 to 3 pups per year. So, which I'll get into more later. But again, if they're only having 1 pup once a year, that's very different from like a mouse reproductive strategy. So there are 2 major clades of bats known as the Microchiroptera and the Megachiroptera, or the microbats and megabats. And they have distinguishing features. The microbats have relatively, compared to the megabats, they have small eyes, relatively small eyes. They have relatively large ears, and they use echolocation. And the megabats have relatively large eyes, relatively large noses, and relatively small ears. And their morphological features are enhanced for their prey, which is actually fruit and nectar. So they have enhanced sense of smell. They have big noses, the better to smell their fruit with. And they have eyes, which is what they use to guide themselves throughout the world, versus the microbats, which use echolocation. They can see, but it's not their primary sense that they use to guide themselves throughout the world. Echolocation is their primary sense, how they take in their surroundings, and correspondingly, their ears are a larger feature than their eyes or their nose. There is one species of megabats that doesn't use echolocation, but it uses like a clicking sound, and it will use that, but it's not true echolocation. The megabats are also known as the Old World bats because they are found in Africa, Asia, and Australia. Their vision is very well developed. They've got an extra claw. Their ears are small. They eat on fruit, nectar, and pollen. They do not echolocate, and they do not occur in the US or in our hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere. The ecosystem services of these old world bats is, for the most part, it's seed dispersal, because as you can see, they can stuff their cheeks and eat a lot of fruit. And then they fly around, sometimes long distances, and they can disperse seeds much in the way that we know that birds also disperse seeds. The microbats are found on across every, most of the continents, not like Antarctica, but all of the other ones. They're much smaller in size, so microbats are ubiquitous. They echolocate, and that is their primary sensory organ. And they are also highly diverse. 17 families. Within the microbats, you will find frugivorous bats, nectarvorous bats, insectivorous bats, and sanguinivorous bats. And they do tend to be smaller, much smaller in size than the megabats, as the name would suggest. In the US, there are about 48 species of bats, and they're almost entirely insectivorous. No vampire bats here, unfortunately. I included this species diversity heat map to illustrate some broad concepts. So most of the Midwest and Eastern US is very similar in terms of species diversity, and it's also true in terms of species composition. The species found out east is very similar to what you would see in the Midwest. So along the East Coast and the Midwest share a lot of species. And then you see an increase in diversity in Kentucky and throughout Missouri, these hotspots here in the Midwest. And that's due to the geology in those areas. So as you likely know, there are karst ecosystems in these areas. Kentucky has mammoth caves, and the Missouri Ozarks are very karsty and lots of caves as well. And the geology of the Ozarks supports additional species that rely on and use the cave resources. And then you see kind of a high demarcation of species composition where this natural land barrier exists, also known as the Rocky Mountains, and that prevents a lot of movement between the eastern and western bat populations, and it also marks the edge of the range for a lot of North American bat species. And this hotspot here is largely due to migratory species that will spend their winters in Central and South America. And they just kind of eke over the edge in summers. Here's a list of bat species that occur in Missouri, about 14, depending on who you ask. And there are three species of federally listed. They've been threatening to list the tricolored bat for many years now, and somehow the paperwork doesn't get done. So I keep forgetting. But the gray bat, which was federally listed as endangered in 1976, the northern long-eared, which was escalated to endangered in 2022, the Indiana bat that was endangered in 1973, and tricolored bat, which is proposed, but still in the works. Okay, so to break down these Midwest species, I think of them in three different categories: the migratory tree bats, fair weather bats, and cave obligate bats. The migratory tree bats use trees all year round, and they'll migrate south in the winter to find more suitable roosts during the winter months. The fair weather bats will use trees and other man-made structures perhaps during the summer, and then they will migrate to cave habitats for winter, which is where they will hibernate. And then the cave obligate bats, they will use caves year round. They will not use the same caves, but they will have their summer cave and their winter cave, but they need a cave at all times. So in Missouri, we have several species of tree bats. So tree bats will hang in trees or they will burrow in leaf litter. They're considered solitary compared to some of the other species we'll talk about later. However, they will have multiple pups per reproductive cycle. So they will have twins or triplets or multiples up to, and I think the record is 5. So they could have a litter. They do migrate seasonally, and because of migration, they experience high mortality at wind farms. So these species in particular are at risk at wind farms. This is probably our most photogenic species, the red bat. Very cute, very furry. They have rounded sort of teddy bear ears. They are this very cute orange color. They're a medium-sized bat, and you can see the size in relation to my gloved hand. And they will hang in trees like this. Now, I see lots of pictures just like this one on iNaturalist. So people are out there and people are seeing them. I have never seen one just hanging on a tree like this. I think it's because I'm mostly out at night when they're flying around and active. And honestly, during COVID, I was like, this is the year. This is the year I'm going to do it. Because I was only doing day work during COVID. And that didn't happen for me. So anyway, this is their range. It's most of the eastern US and Canada. So it's a pretty common species. They specialize on moths, and they will live in forested areas, parks. Again, these are tree bats. They never use caves. They are long distance migrants. And normally when you're out at dusk and you see the first bats of the night, it's going to be a red bat. So they're very commonly the first ones out doing some foraging. And then in the fall, they'll perform a long distance migration. In some areas of the southeastern US, red bats have been encountered flying from leaf litter in advance of prescribed burns during the late fall. And here's our red bat with her multiple pups. I think 1, 2, 3 in this picture. So they commonly produce 2 to 3 pups, and all at once, one litter. And the females roost singly, even when rearing their young. Okay. And here's another tree bat. This one is sort of remarkable in that it is the largest species in the US. It's called the hoary bat, or Lasiurus cinereus. It is also the only species that occurs in Hawaii. It's thought that they are the only bats strong enough to fly off the coast and perhaps got swept away in a storm during a migratory event. And that's how they were introduced to the Hawaiian Islands. The species that's in Hawaii is considered a subspecies. And another bit of trivia about this bat is that they will occasionally navigate without using echolocation. And we know this because we have like thermal infrared video of them flying paired with acoustic equipment. So it's like there's a bat flying in the video, but there's no echolocation being picked up by the detector. So that was sort of a new bit of knowledge that came about in the last 10 years as technology has advanced. A lot of times I get questioned about why they're called hoary bats. Well, hoary. The definition of that is a gray or white, sort of this tipped bit on the fur. So the hair shaft is actually tipped white or silver, and that's why they're called hoary bats. The hoary bats will also echolocate at the lowest frequency of our North American species, which is around 20 to 30 kilohertz, and that's just above human hearing range. If you have very good hearing, you might be able to hear them. The second category that I mentioned is the fair weather bats. These bats like to use dead trees. And historically, before humans settled, they would have used dead trees as their roosts. Now they will be found in human structures such as pavilions or picnic shelters, barns, attics of old structures, old churches a lot of the time, old houses. And they really do like man-made structures because they tend to be pretty reliable sources of shelter. And they will use caves during winter only, and they will have 1 to 2 pups per year. All of these species have only 1 pup except for the big brown that will have 2 pups in the summer. And all of these species are socially gregarious, and they form maternity colonies between 20 to 200 individuals. And so, as I mentioned before, the tree bats roost solitarily, and these will roost in groups in the summer. Here's some examples of some tree roosts. They really like exfoliating bark on dead trees. As the tree dies, the bark will start to peel away. And as you can imagine, a roost like this is going to change quite a bit from year to year. And so as the years go by, it will at first become a better habitat because the bark will be peeling away, but then it will degrade in quality as you start losing those big pieces of bark that they would hide under. They like these because there's a lot of solar exposure. Sun is beating down on these dead trees because there's no foliage to shade it, and it gets nice and steamy, which is what they like for rearing their young. This is an example of where these bats might forage. They like still water, and they like water that is not covered by duckweed or any type of vegetation. They will also use areas like this, and they do prefer to forage over water, even in the prairie riparian zones, where they can get immediate access to their prey. Most of their prey has an aquatic larval stage. And so basically, as those different insect species are erupting, the bats will be there and take advantage of that. This is an example of bad bat habitat because it is a thicket of, I think, buckthorn and honeysuckle. Nobody's going to fly through that. And it does not provide very good foraging. So our most common and ubiquitous fair weather bat is the big brown bat. It is found throughout North America and even Central America. And most often, this is the bat you will find if someone says, oh, I've got bats in my barn or I've got bats in my attic. This is the species that really, really loves human structures and is very tolerant of human disturbance. So they're perfectly happy to live alongside humans without getting too distressed by noises or voices or whatever. And they're the second largest species. They weigh up to 30 grams. This is one of the endangered species that we have in Missouri. And if you've ever been to Hannibal, there is the largest Indiana bat hibernacula. I think the last count was over 200,000 Indiana bats hibernating at the Sedalis Nature Preserve. And so it's a very important and unique resource for them in Missouri. And that is it's estimated to be about 1/3 of the Indiana bat population. So 1/3 of all the Indiana bats are hibernating at Sedalis Nature Preserve. They form maternity colonies in summer, and they do hibernate in large, dense clusters, as you can sort of see here. Yep, there's another picture. So this photo is a picture of Indiana bats hibernating. You can see there's like a different one there. It's probably a gray bat stuck in there, hiding, snuggling in. But yeah, you can see they pack in like sardines. And this is their preferred, this is their preferred situation for hibernating, is right up in each other's business. The gray bat is the cave obligate species that we think of in Missouri. It has been federally listed as endangered since 1973. However, the population has been recovering quite a bit due to protection of the cave environments. They are highly gregarious. They form enormous colonies. These are some little baby gray bats on the cave wall. This is what they look like when they're hibernating. And let's see if I can get this video started. There it is. This is what it looks like inside of a gray bat hibernacula. All of those dark patches on the wall. I know the video is taken with my cell phone probably, so it's not the best quality, but those are all bats hanging out, and we're doing our best to count them. In a situation like this, we'll take an estimate and call it a day. We have a meter squared. It's kind of just like half of a square, a meter this way and a meter that way. And one person will hold it up, we'll take some pictures, later we'll count the pictures, we'll count the bats from the picture and do a little bit of math and get our best estimate of how many bats are in there. Oop, now it's playing. This is a video of the same hibernacula, but this is like the opening. And it's what we would call like a pit cave because the opening is essentially a vertical shaft. And this is gray bats in fall. This is their behavior in the fall season. Once they've migrated to their winter cave, and then they'll hang out and do a lot of socializing before hibernation. Okay, let's get past this. Okay, which brings me to hibernation. Bats are mammals that perform torpor and hibernation. And so we typically think of torpor as a mini hibernation, short-term hibernation. In both torpor and hibernation, you'll see a reduction in metabolic rates. This is used to optimize their energetic situation. So to reduce energy expenditure when there is no food resources around. So that is the winter in Missouri because all of our North American species are insectivorous. In the winter, there's not a lot of insects around, and so they have to conserve energy through hibernation. I have a video here from the inside of a cave, and this is video of bats coming out to rehydrate. So normally they'll arouse from hibernation about every 14 days. What they do during that period of time is drink and rehydrate. They will perform a sleep cycle or two, and then they might also just relocate within the cave to a spot that they find more preferable. Checking the time. Okay, we've made it to half an hour. So studying bats, I'm going to be a little more quick. Studying bats can be difficult because they're nocturnal. They are hard to get to in terms of like the caves themselves. Also, when they roost, they'll roost high off the ground. And they're also hard to catch because they fly around with quite a bit of agility. And so we have a few field survey techniques that assist us in studying bats. And the first is mist netting. This is what a bat trap looks like. And depending on the geography, we will set up over water. Because we know bats will be coming to get a drink of water first thing in the morning. That's what everybody does. You get out of bed and get a drink of water. So we'll set these up in the evening, and then there's like a pulley system here, and these are the nets like collapsed. And if you think of it sort of like an accordion, it'll open up as we pull the ropes, and then it will be open and ready to catch bats. This is another example of how we would set them up. Not sure you can see my little pointer anymore. There's the poles, and then the net is strung between those. And this is a really traditional way to set up the net because the bats will be flying down this corridor, and they will run into the net. They will not be able to like scoot around it, which is what sort of poses the difficulties for studying bats on the prairie. When you don't have this sort of funnel situation made from the natural vegetation, it's very difficult to trap bats. You could put one of these out in the middle of the prairie, but the bat will simply fly around it. The same on the edge. People do put edge nets out, but they are not as successful. You can catch juveniles, which are pretty inexperienced, and let's just be honest, young and stupid, and you'll more likely catch juveniles that way, but the more experienced bats will circumvent that pretty quickly. And so here's a bat in the net. That's what they look like. And then we have some protective equipment, including leather gloves and these nitrile gloves that we'll put over them so that we can disinfect between animals, and we will untangle them from the net and take some biological data. This is just some additional bycatch that is exciting when you're having a slow night, but not when you're busy. There's also harp trapping for situations like that pit cave where hundreds of thousands of bats are in there. We'll use a setup like this where the bats will fly into this fishing line and then fall into a bag, and they'll hang out in this canvas bag until we're ready to process and collect samples. You can tell the difference between a juvenile and adult bat looking at the wing bones. So as mammals mature, the cartilage on our joints calcifies. And so as you know, young mammals and children are quite flexible, and then that is due to having cartilage and and then as they get older, all of that kind of firms up, and you can visually see the difference. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes we will put a transmitter on the bats in order to track them to where they are roosting. These have to be very small because a lot of times we're tracking Indiana bats, our endangered species. They only weigh around 6 grams, the adults do. And so part of the regulation is that it cannot exceed 5% of the bat's body weight. So it must be very small and tiny. And we use surgical glue to put it right there between the shoulders of the bat. And then we release them, and then we use, this is called a yagi, we use that to track them down to where they are hanging out. And then oftentimes people will do an emergence count, and this is used for estimating colony size and assessing area usage by target species. And also, if you identify the roost and you know that a lot of bats are using it, you can protect it. A lot of times we will do this before prescribed burns so that we can protect those important roost trees before the burn and make sure that they are not consumed in the burn. So is it going to play? Let me get this. There it is. I think it just needs a second to load sometimes. So here's where the roost is, and you can see the bats leaving the roost and also just flying around in general. Let's play it one more time. Normally, we're doing this type of survey and emergence count with the naked eye, and often it's best if you have two people who are sitting there so that you can get multiple vantage points and a better, more accurate count that way. We also do winter surveys. This is how we get an estimated census for our bat species that are hibernating in Missouri. The advantage is the bats are not moving and they're all congregated into a same place in high density. And this is, at the time, my supervisor rappelling into that same cave that I've showed videos of before, the grayback cave. And do we have time for threats to bats? I'm going to make it quick. Threats to bats. The first one that you've probably already heard of is white nose syndrome. That is a fungal species known as white nose, well, Pseudogymnoastis destructans, and it basically grows on them like a mold when they are hibernating. So any of our bats that are hibernating in caves are susceptible to this. The gray bat, there are no documented mortalities, so they have an innate immunity, probably because of historic they were historically exposed to it, and then there was probably a bottleneck in the population at that time. But for a lot of our species, it's evolutionarily the first time they've encountered this fungus. And it is pretty devastating for certain bats, including our northern long-eared bat and the Indiana bat. The big brown bat only has about 25% mortality rate, and they're really not a problem because in general, they're pretty common, and they are also that one species that has 2 pups per year. So their recovery is a lot more successful than our species that have only 1 pup per year. It can be spread by humans on equipment and clothing because the fungal spores are very persistent. That's the job of a fungal spore, is to persist in the environment until the correct conditions present themselves, and then they will start growing. Once the bats come out of hibernation, if they survive the winter, they will leave the cave and it will no longer be the right conditions for the fungus to grow. They'll be hot, they'll be dry, and they will be, their immune system will be active again. So if they survive the winter and make it to when the insects are out, they can recover from this. The problem is they usually don't survive the winter. The main reason they die from this is through increased arousals throughout hibernation. So normally, like I said, every 14 days, they'll come out of hibernation to rehydrate, blah, blah, blah. With white nose, they will do that every 7 days. So they'll run out of their energy reserves about twice as fast. And it'll end up being February when they come out of hibernation with no body fat left. And then they starve. So the history on this is in 2006, the fungus was first found in New York State, and it has since spread throughout the US. I actually have the newest map, but it's not as pretty because you can really see the spread using this rainbow gradient, how it started here and just spread most likely from bat to bat as they are migrating and encountering. They're very social and encountering other bats. They can spread it to each other that way. And this is the most recent map showing, like in the last few years, how it's spread. Okay, habitat destruction. As you know, most of these bats need trees and dead trees specifically. And in urban areas, dead trees don't last very long because they are a hazard to safety and property. And so that's a problem. This is sort of the evolution of a snag. And occasionally bats face persecution. People really like them these days for the most part. That's getting better. And wind energy is really bad for the migratory species, the tree bats, the red bats, the hoary bats. Especially, there was a paper that came out that estimated that the hoary bats would be extinct within, I think it was the date that they estimated was like 2050 something. So that's worrisome. The end. Now we have time for questions.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Jeanette, for that really informative presentation. We do have a number of questions. We will get through as many of these as we can. So the first question for you is, do you recommend bat houses? And if yes, what design would you recommend? Where can you find that design? And when you are installing a bat house, what is a good location for a bat house, like in a normal residential yard?
Yes. Okay. So my opinion on this is when you live in an urban environment where those dead trees are being taken down with regularity, it is helpful to install bat houses to provide habitat that is stable, and because that roosting habitat is hard to come by. When you are in, a lot of Missouri is very rural. There's a lot of trees and there's a lot of natural habitat available. So if you're in an area where there is natural habitat, the bat boxes may not be as successful just because they're competing with the natural habitat. Bat boxes in general, they can disappoint people because people put them up thinking it's going to be like a bluebird box where you put it, they will come. The bats, they are very picky, and often, well, not often, it is known that bats have multiple roosts within an area that they use for different, either different parts of the season, or they have a lot of backups. And they, if, you know, in the early rainy part of the season, they might choose a sunnier roost, so it's warmer for them. And then once we get into August and we're having like deathly hot, like days for weeks and weeks, they will use a cooler roost. And so they do need a variety of options to choose between within their home range. And so it can be useful in certain circumstances, but it's not as reliable. And it is a lot of work to hang because the guidelines are that they are hung at least 15 feet off the ground. So that can be on like a telephone pole type situation, or on the side of a barn, or people do it on the side of their house. I'm never like suggesting that, just because I don't know that you want to attract bats like to the house where they might start investigating ways to get in. So, and then there are a lot of different designs. There's also, there are a lot of studies on what's the best design, what's the best, like how to orient it in terms of like north or south or whatever. And it's very difficult to tease apart that information. And also different species may have different preferences. So what I would say, if you want to hang a bat house, make sure it's at least 15 feet off the ground, and then it has good solar exposure. I have seen bats hung on the side of live trees, and that's just not going to be attractive to a large amount of bats. You might get males that are roosting solitarily, but what people really want to see is like 20, 30 bats coming out of their house. And if you put it on the side of a live tree, that will not be what you want. Did I get everything?
I think that covered all aspects of that question. Thank you, Jeanette. We have a couple of additional questions about bat habitat. So are there specific tree species that our tree bats prefer for habitat?
Oh, the tree bats. Less is known about them. They are less picky about specific tree species than the bats that will hibernate in colonies. The colony hibernating bats do prefer cottonwoods, hickories, oaks. I'm forgetting one. But the tree bats that roost solitarily, they have less specific needs because they will actually roost in live trees in the foliage.
Thank you. So if someone has bats that have entered a house or a human structure, the question was, is it okay to leave those bats alone? And will they revisit, increase the number of indoor roosts? What is this, how does their roosting habitat change or not change sort of over time?
Yeah. So I get a lot of calls from people with bats in their house, and it can range. The first thing that I want to know is how many bats, because if it's one, it's probably a male bat, and you don't really have to worry about that because he's not going to produce a lot of waste and he's not really going to do damage. Once you start getting multiples, yes, they will come. It's more likely that it is a maternity colony where they are actively rearing young. And the behavior of the bats is to come back year after year to a place where they have been successful. And also, generally, they'll start where they were born. So multiple generations over time, if it's, especially safe and nice and cozy in there, they will come back year after year, and you could potentially gain a pretty sizable colony. If this happens to you and you find yourself with a colony of bats, the best thing to do is what's called exclusion, which is in figuring out how they've gotten in and then putting some sort of one-way door over that opening. A lot of times it's a flap that like they'll be able to fly out or crawl out, but then they won't be able to get back in. So it's some kind of one-way door. And it is very important to wait until the fall to install that, because the last thing you want is for in the middle of summer to install an exclusion device and the mother bats leave the roost to go forage and then cannot return to their pups. And then you've got a bunch of dead pups in your attic, which is not nice, but also not the result that you want. So there are specific times per year that you would want to handle it. And that would be in the fall when the pups are adults and they are flying and they're able to leave on their own.
Thank you for that very helpful
Mhm.
advice. As someone who has had bats in a couple of different houses,
I'm so jealous.
that
It
is
never happens to me. Like, never to me.
it's very exciting when you hear them in the walls, but it's very helpful for folks to hear about the techniques for handling bat roosting
Yes, and then
effectively.
once they're out and you've confirmed they've left, you want to do a more permanent patch to whatever opening they're using. Yeah.
Yeah. So we also have some questions about bat, just general bat questions and some bat biology. So first question, you mentioned early on in your presentation, hearing bats making a clicking sound. How does that differ from true echolocation?
Yes. So echolocation is when bats will use ultrasonic frequencies of sound that is generally above our hearing range. And the clicking is so the ultrasonic sound that they will emit is using their vocal cords and other soft tissue. And the clicking will be like a, and that is in the audible range that humans can hear. There are also a couple birds that will use this very, I won't call it echolocation, but it is a system to assess their surroundings. They can hear differences in the sound, and I've even heard that there are a few blind people worldwide that use clicking.
Thank you. Okay, and then a couple of questions about bat species distribution. So one is, are all Missouri bat species also in Illinois?
Ooh, there is a lot of overlap. Illinois is also a very diverse state, north to the south. And you'll see populations at the top of Illinois that are much more like Wisconsin, and populations at the bottom of Illinois that are much more like Missouri. So Austroriparius does exist, but only in the bottom tip of Missouri. They will not have, they do have Townsend's big-eared, but not the subspecies that was historically found in Missouri. I'm trying to think of, and Illinois doesn't have as many, I can't remember exactly, but it's very similar because, bats haven't learned their state demarcations, their state boundaries.
So another question, this is about Ozark big-eared bats.
Yeah.
Are there any that are still holding on in the Southwest Ozarks of Missouri?
Yeah, so as far as I know, the last time it was documented, an Ozark big-eared bat, which is a subspecies of Corinnarinus townsendii. The last time that was documented in Missouri was in the 70s. I know people are looking for them. People occasionally get very excited, but we don't have, as far as I know, but I may be out of the loop, I don't think there's been any recent sightings. Historically, the idea was that they were a very sensitive species when it comes to human disturbance. And so whether that's true or not, I'm not sure. But that is what people have said.
Thank you. Right. With climate change, how do warmer, drier winters affect bats and their hibernation?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. We're starting to see studies come out looking at how climate change has impacted winter behavior and winter roost range. So as you might expect, we're seeing the winter roosts creep northward. And we're also seeing more frequent emergences and foraging on the landscape, especially, in Missouri, you can get a random winter day that is like 60 degrees. And on those days, you will see bat activity. And also the shortening of winter. When it comes to the bats that are affected by white nose syndrome, they have budgeted a certain amount of fat for the winter to get them through. When the time period that fat has to last for is shortened, you could see better survival for white nose syndrome. So silver lining on that, maybe.
So another question related is this questioner asks that they've seen bats in the KC area over the winter. What species of bats would those be likely to be?
Most common when we see bat activity during winter, it is the big brown bat. They are most tolerant of cold temperatures. They tend to hibernate close to the opening of caves. So caves, the internal structure of caves can be very diverse, depending on the actual shape of the cave and where the opening of the cave is located in relation to the rest of the cave. You can have warm pockets of air. If there's a big domed ceiling, the warm air will rise and get trapped there. And you'll have some bats that prefer that, and other bats that prefer colder areas of the cave. They're called microclimates because over here is a little bit different than over there. And often at the entrance to caves, it is the coldest because that's where the outside air has the most exposure. And that's where we'll see a lot of big brown bats. And I believe that they are also on the edge like that because they're keeping tabs on the external temperature more closely than the other bats are.
Thank you. All right, this is a fun question. How do bats keep from colliding with one another?
Oh, I don't think that they do. Collisions do occur, just as you might expect. What they will do is when bats are in large groups, like in those videos I showed coming out of the cave in large swarms, they will alter their normal frequency so as to be transmitting on different frequencies than the people around them, right? If we're all yelling on the same frequency, there's going to be a lot of noise and it's going to be very difficult to tell where we're going. So they will change their frequency to be different than what they would normally use. And they will use different types of calls that give them better close-up range acuity versus when they're flying in an open prairie, they might use a lower frequency to do like large sweeps. When they are in sort of a cluttered environment, which you would think of like a forest, or when everybody's emerging at the same time, they will use higher frequencies, which attenuate at shorter distances and allow for more close-up detail vision.
Thank you. Right, we have also some questions about human and researcher interactions with bats. Mm-hmm. So first question, is there any opportunity for citizen scientists to report echo monitoring findings?
Yes. So there's a big project which is through the USGS, and it's called NABAT, which stands for North American Bat, and it is a big acoustic monitoring organization that the reason I hesitate now is because the funding has been pulled. So I have 4 detectors that I use to monitor areas near where I live. And I received an email a few weeks ago saying that they are pulling all of those and we're sending them back, and they are pausing that for now. So I don't really know what the future of that is, but you could look up NABAT. You should have it's set up into regional hubs, and Missouri would be part of the Midwest one, which is located at the Illinois Natural History Survey. But you should be able to find a lot of information online about NABAT. Maybe reach out and see if they have plans. I don't know what the plans are. It's not looking good. But yes, for the last 4 years, I've been volunteering with equipment provided by NABAT to monitor other places that you can. It kind of depends on where you live. I think that there is opportunity to volunteer at the Sedalis Nature Preserve if you're in the Hannibal area. If you're not, locally, I'm not sure.
Thank you, Jeanette. What sort of protective gear is required when you're studying bats and their hibernacula? And we had a related question too that was actually from someone who volunteers with a wildlife rehab clinic, asking how would you recommend someone handle a bat if this person works at a rehab, they don't take bats, but sometimes bats bring them, or bats are brought to them by folks who are concerned about.
Yes. Okay. So the first one is PPE when working with bats and wildlife in general. When we are in the caves, we have certain PPE, which is our helmet to protect ourselves from like the cave environment. And we also will wear like a full outer layer jumpsuit that we can take off and keep separate. We have like our dirty area, which is going to keep all of the like white nose syndrome, possible contaminated stuff. And we'll have like an underlayer that is going to be clean, and then do a lot of like disinfecting once you get out of the cave. Normal, just like cave safety is your helmet, lights, extra lights, proper footwear. And depending on the type of cave, in Missouri, you don't need a respirator in caves. Some of the tropical caves that are like, they're called hot caves, you should really wear a respirator. And then in terms of when we're doing the summer sampling where we're trapping bats on the landscape, we will wear leather gloves to protect from bites. We will have the nitrile gloves over the top, which are easily disinfected. And we will wear, since COVID, we will wear N95 masks. And that happened because we know that COVID is zoonotic and could possibly be transmitted to North American species from the researchers that have been exposed to COVID. And so that's a precaution to protect the bats from the humans. What was the next bit of that?
The other part of the question was just asking about handling bats.
Right. So often people find a bat on the ground or in their house, and you need to protect yourself from being bitten by a bat. As with any wild mammal, bats have the possibility of carrying rabies, especially if you're observing abnormal behavior. Anyone who does research with bats is prophylactically vaccinated against rabies. And we do, the guideline used to be to get titers checked, which is to check your circulating antibody levels, checked every 2 years. However, they've updated that to every 3 years. So that is how researchers stay safe. If there's a bat in your house, you really should do your best not to handle it without proper like gloves, something that leather gloves they can't bite through. And often I just say like use a shoebox or something to sort of trap it, and then avoid having to grab it at all.
Helpful advice.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeanette. So another question about research. I think you had mentioned that it's challenging to research bats in prairie settings. And this question was to survey bats and trap bats on the prairie. Would you look for an ecotone that had a tree line at the edge? Or what would be the kind of way to do research on bats on the prairie?
I think the acoustic equipment, which I didn't really go over, is probably the most useful in a prairie situation because trapping is difficult. So the acoustic equipment will record sound at the frequencies that bats echolocate. And then to some degree, you can take those recordings and differentiate between species of bats. And that can tell you a few things. It can tell you what species occur, presence or absence for each species. And it can tell you what I call bat activity levels. You can see how active bats are and how much time they spend in that area. What you cannot tell, and it's limited, what you cannot tell from acoustic recordings is how many bats you have. It could be the same bat recorded 20 times or the entire night, or it could be 20 bats recorded once. So there's a lot of limitations to what the acoustics can tell you in terms of your population structure. Certain things can only be determined from actually trapping them and seeing. We have females here, we have females that are reproductive, we can see that they're lactating, they have pups. So we know that this area is important for the success of the bats, reproductive success of the bats, yeah.
Thank you. Is there any bat behavior that you've observed during your studies or your research that has surprised you?
Oh, I mean, so the hoary bats can be particularly aggressive, and there are videos out there of them attacking other bats. It's very gruesome. I do not endorse looking those up unless you want to see a bat get eaten by another bat. That's what comes to mind. I will say for my master's, I studied, part of what my study involved was sampling pups at roosts in summer. So when they are born, and I had a very accessible site. It was a picnic shelter. When they were born, I'd go there with a ladder, climb up the ladder after the mothers had left, and pluck the babies from the roost. Very invasive. It made mother bats very angry. However, none of them ever landed on me and bit me. So when you think about bats being aggressive towards humans, people are often afraid that a bat is going to get stuck in their hair or just maybe attack them, fly towards them and attack them. I can tell you that over several summers, I did probably the most rude thing you could do to a bat, which is invade their roost and take their babies. I put them back, but they didn't know I was going to do that. Take their babies. And I never was like attacked. What would happen is they would swoop very nearby, but that is investigative. They are investigating what's happening because they're very concerned about it, but never did they land on me or bite me or make contact. And so I would say that is the true test of how afraid you should be of a bat. And then of course I put the babies back and they were fine. Just want to include that part.
Are there any sort of new or emerging technologies? One questioner mentioned drones that might be helpful for the study of bats into the future.
Yes, and people are working on drones. The biggest thing I have heard in terms of technologies using drones is for the tracking. So I had that slide where people are walking around with the antenna. There can be difficulties with that tracking, just finding the signal. Sometimes bats move a lot between the time that you put the transmitter on and the time that you start looking in the morning. And sometimes it can be very difficult to locate them, and sometimes you lose your transmitter. What the drones could do theoretically is real-time track them during the night as they are flying around foraging and track their movements in a very precise way. So that is exciting.
That sounds very cool. Jeanette, are you still performing active field work or research on bats? And if so, what are you currently working on?
So I recently had a baby. So the field work for me has dropped off recently. However, I still do go to Sedalis Nature Preserve in Hannibal for every 2 years we do the Indiana bat count. So I still do that. I still do some trapping at some of the local nature preserves to just as on a volunteer basis. And then I will still do some consulting as needed.
Awesome. We still have many questions that folks have asked, but we are running up to about almost to 5:15 at this point. And so we so appreciate all of the engagement from our webinar attendees today. I think, Jeanette, I'm going to ask you just two more questions.
Sure.
There's one that kind of captures, I'm going to try to capture what was the spirit of a number of questions, which was, what are some of the things that we can do to support bats, to support bat habitat, and to help bat populations in general?
Yeah, so the biggest thing that anyone can do to support bats is to support the local preserves that are the refuges from habitat conversion. So really, bats are a species that has a quite large home range. They use a lot of space. Thankfully, because they are flighted, they can move from different islands of habitat, like you would see on like an urban adjacent landscape where you've got patches of here and there undeveloped. So they are able to utilize the landscape that way. But having clean water is very important to bats and all animals. The insect population, the issues that we're seeing with a decline in insect population is affecting the bats. This is what they eat. Insecticides, pesticides are very detrimental to the bat's food resource, and having an abundant insect population helps bats. And if you have a property that is forested, removing invasives like invasive woodies that choke out the ground, like the buckthorn and the honeysuckle and the olives, removing those and leaving dead trees to stand, is how to support bats. And don't go into caves in the winter when they're hibernating.
Thank you. And this is the final question. Give you an opportunity to share some resources with the group. If folks are interested in learning more about bats beyond this presentation, particularly bats of the lower Midwest, what would you recommend? Websites, other resources, books, research?
There's a few really great organizations. One is called Bat Conservation International, and that's an NGO, a nonprofit that has biologists all over the country and even internationally on their staff. A few of them are located in Missouri, and they're just a great resource in general. They have bat house designs. They've got information on doing your bat houses. A lot of information on their website. So that's batconservation.org, I believe. Let's see. batcon.org. But if you search Bat Conservation International, you'll find that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jeanette, for spending time with us this afternoon and sharing all of your wealth of knowledge about bats. I am going to turn things over back to Lily to wrap up the webinar. But we want to thank you again, Jeanette, and
thanks for having me.
Audience.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeanette, and thank you, Emily, for facilitating the Q&A. As I mentioned before, this webinar has been recorded and it'll be sent to you tomorrow in an email, along with links and other helpful resources that were shared today. So before we sign off, I have a couple announcements about upcoming in-person and online events. We hope that you'll join us for our next webinar on October 22nd, when we'll host several leaders from Grow Native Gardens of Excellence as they share efforts, designs, and plants that sequester or redirect rainwater, reduce erosion, and create moisture-preserving habitat in their gardens. So save the date for the next webinar, the one after that, on November 5th. It's a Grow Native webinar focusing on the overwintering habits of moths, butterflies, and bees with Chris Hartley. As a reminder, we have one more plant sale happening this fall in New Franklin, Missouri on October 18th, Missouri Chestnut Roast Festival. Find details on that event on our socials and on our websites. Next, registration is ongoing for our MPF Friends of Quiver River State Park Grasslands Workday, which is happening October 19th near Troy, Missouri. The workday will be held with a minimum of 5 volunteers and a maximum of 25, and it'll be held by MPF Vice President of Science and Management, Bruce Schutte. Please sign up by Thursday, October 16th. All of these events and more can be registered for at our websites under the Events tabs. That concludes today's broadcast. Thank you and have a good evening.